time for Joan Esposito. Live, local, and progressive.
Joan, as always, exceptional work from you from, your TV days all the way up to today. You're truly exceptional, and thanks for this great show you have.
It's time for Joan Esposito on WCPT 820, Chicago's Progressive Talk.
I don't know how we're going to survive 4 years of this. This is so much worse than his first term. He first of all froze medical information. The CDC usually puts out public health updates. For instance, did you know that in Kansas right now there's an outbreak of tuberculosis? It's localized. I think it affects some 30-some people right now. It's considered a small outbreak, but this is the kind of information that the CDC would publicize so that other departments of health could be on the lookout for this kind of thing. But no, that information doesn't go out anymore. There are no public health bulletins anymore. And the biggest news is not only the freeze of information, but the freeze of money. Federal payments, federal grants, all being frozen. What does that affect? Donald Trump's always talking about, foreign aid, what do we get for our money? Well, this isn't foreign aid. This is Head Start. This is Medicaid. This is assistance with buying food if you're poor. That's what this is. The federal site for Medicaid isn't working right now. The president's press secretary had a news conference today, and when she was asked about Medicaid, well, you're putting out this big list of all these freezes, all these grants, all this federal spending that's just frozen, probably illegally. What about Medicaid? Let me get back to you on that. And they've recently put out a note saying, we know that the site is down, but we're still processing payments and it'll be up shortly. Really? Interesting. So we got that going. And you may have seen Carolyn Kennedy made a video and wrote a letter to the Senate saying that they should not confirm Bobby Kennedy Jr., saying he's a predator. CNN apparently played her video. The Washington Post reported it this morning, but they made it sound like her video was being sent to the Senate. Somehow CNN got a hold of it, and apparently they played it. I didn't get a chance to see it, but a very good journalist friend of mine did and said they caught the part of it. And one of the things that she says is that when they were all little, Bobby used to take live small animals and put them in a blender and kill them by turning the blender on. What a sick man. What an utterly reprehensible human being. Okay. Oh, you know what? I violated my rule. I said that I wasn't going to get mad. I said this wasn't going to be the outrage machine. But I also warned you that from time to time I would slip up. This is one of those times. I have slipped up. Okay, Joan. It feels like he's already been president for like 15 years, doesn't it? I doubt that there are too many people in the sound of my voice, listening to my voice, who voted for him. But if you happen to be one of those people, is this what you wanted? Is this what you voted for? Or were you one of those people who said, it won't be as bad as you think. He won't do the stuff that he's talking about. It's all for show. Well, sweetheart, in his first go-round, he did the things that he said he was going to do. Anybody who thought that he wasn't going to make good on the things he was saying was apparently in a coma during his first term in office. And that whole, I don't even know what Project 2025 is. I don't know what it is. I sure don't have anything to do with it. Well, you know what? Go look it up. Because he's implementing it. Page by page by page. He is implementing it. Just in case you weren't paying attention. Chuck Schumer and my favorite Senator Chris Murphy both spoke yesterday, the Senate Democratic Leadership Press Conference. Chuck Schumer talked about this federal money that was being stopped by the Trump administration. Chris Murphy talked about how this is just a blatant power grab. Of course, there are going to be lawsuits. Of course, some of this is going to be challenged. But in the end, even if we win most of it, we won't win all of it. We didn't the first time either. I think Mark Elias, I don't know how many times that famous democracy docket Democratic lawyer sued Trump in the first administration, and they won like 90% of the time, but that means 10% of it got through. 10% of the crap got through. And it is acknowledged by a lot of people. He fired all those Justice Department lawyers. They're considered civil servants, and there's a provision that says there must be 30 days notification. Blatantly illegal firing. But they're going to have to take it to court, as they are everything. But you know what? We do what we have to do, don't we? Anyway, I want to share with you, first of all, what Chuck Schumer had to say about this halt of federal money and who is going to be the loser in all of this. Listen to Chuck Schumer talking yesterday.
Last night, President Trump plunged the country into chaos without a shred of warning. The Trump administration announced a halt to virtually all federal funds across the country. In an instant, Donald Trump has shut off billions, perhaps trillions of dollars that directly support states, cities, towns, schools, hospitals, small businesses, and most of all, American families. This is a dagger at the heart of the average American family in red states, in blue states, in cities, in suburbs, in rural areas. It is just outrageous. Funds for things like disaster assistance, local law enforcement, rural hospitals, aid to the elderly, food for people in need, all are on the chopping block in this new administration. Why? They need tax cuts for the ultra-wealthy, and these cuts, they think, will fund them. Every one of our offices has been deluged with calls from people who are in panic. What is this going to mean? What if I have a hospital that has people on life support? What are we going to do? And just like the January 6th pardons, this decision is lawless, dangerous, destructive, cruel. It's illegal. It's unconstitutional. Plain and simple, this is Project 2025. Project 2025 by another name.
Oh, yeah, I mentioned Head Start. Meals on Wheels is also one of the programs that has lost their funding. So, yeah, there is panic. a lot of the Meals on Wheels people, elderly people who live alone, sometimes it's their only food, and sometimes the drivers who bring those meals are their only contact with people. So, yeah, if somebody in your family relies on Meals on Wheels, man, you better reach out to them, because there's no money for the program right now. Because, all of Donald Trump's rich benefactors, they're expecting, he's a transactional guy, quid pro quo. I do this for you. I'm going to donate millions to your reelection campaign. You get in there and you get me tax cuts. Deal. It is a deal. This is a guy who gets paid for everything he does and only does anything if there's going to be a benefit, going to be an upside. And you know what? I think we already know this is a guy completely without any empathy. He doesn't hear old people. They don't get Meals on Wheels. Well, don't they have families? What about their neighbors? Can't their neighbors cook for them? Chris Murphy, Senator Chris Murphy, identified this for what it is. And frankly, everything our new shock and awe president is doing right now, it's designed to distract us. It is designed to infuriate us. It is designed to make us feel helpless. I don't know who is going to be taking some of this stuff to court, but I sure hope that there is a Democratic fund, not just the various organizations and activist groups that are going to be fighting this, but I hope there is some Democratic Party support. I hope they've got some fight in them. And if that means spending some of their precious campaign money on lawyers, so be it. Chris Murphy so far is just about the only high-profile Dem who has consistently come out swinging. And at the Senate Democratic Leadership Press Conference yesterday, he was in perfect form. Listen to Senator Chris Murphy.
So this is an attempt by Donald Trump to seize power. That sounds like a provocative thing to say, but how else do you describe what we have watched happen over the last week? The broad immunization of political violence, the illegal firing of inspectors general there to make sure that the money of the taxpayers isn't stolen. And today, the illegal and unconstitutional decision to put the President of the United States and no one else in charge of who gets federal money and who doesn't. What President Trump is doing is seizing control of the federal budget and deciding by himself who gets money and who doesn't. For two reasons. One, he wants to bank money so that he can afford his massive tax cut for billionaires and corporations. But second, so that he can hand out money to his friends, to the companies that are run by his billionaire donors, to states that voted for him, to congressional districts with members of Congress who are loyal to him, and so that he can deny money to any organization run by Democrats, to companies that are competitors to his billionaire friends, to congressional districts represented by his political opponents. This is what a king does. This is not how a democracy works. One man does not decide how taxpayers' money is spent so that it only gets sent to the president's political friends and it gets used to punish his political enemies. The scope of the damage that will be done is enormous. To poor kids who rely on Head Start programs, to families who desperately need that cancer research done, to veterans who, if they miss one or two appointments, their life falls apart suddenly overnight. We have to understand what is happening in context, right? The president wants you to be distracted by the day-to-day announcements, but put together the pardoning of the violent rioters, the firing of the inspectors general, and today, the stoppage of federal funding, leaving the decision only to the political whims of President Trump, represents the gravest, most serious constitutional crisis of our lifetime, one that threatens to undermine the very premise of American democracy.
Why isn't every Democrat screaming loud and long about this? I'm, just asking for a friend. Just curious. Governor Pritzker talked to Dana Bash earlier a few days ago on CNN. And one of the things that he was talking about is what Democrats need to do, what Democrats need to focus on. And I'm going to share that with you in a minute. But I would add to what Governor Pritzker is saying. Yes, we need to focus on regular folks and working families. And we need to make sure they understand we are on their side. Not like some ivory tower intellectual, but somebody who is willing to be in the trenches with them. But we also need to fight. The ACLU was prepared. They knew that there was going to be a bunch of bad stuff happening. I was getting emails from them. They were getting ready. They were also, asking more people to sign up and be members, but they were ready to go to court. A lot of these activist groups, immigration groups, are getting ready to go to court. What are we getting from our Democratic lawmakers? Fighting words, that's a start. Fighting actions, that's what I'm waiting for. I'm waiting for a blue wall, not a blue wall of victory in the voting booth, a blue wall of resistance. We will not be moved. Anyway, like I said, Governor Pritzker, talking to Dana Bash, talked about what Democrats need to do, what they need to focus on, and what will be good for people and good for the Democratic Party. Listen to this.
It's clear what we need to be doing is standing up for the values of the vast majority of American people and what Democrats stand for, right? We want to raise the minimum wage. They don't. They want to take away health care from 1 million people in my state. We think that we ought to make health care more affordable and more available to people. We want to lower costs for people. We eliminated the grocery tax in my state so that it would be less expensive for people to go buy their groceries. But what's Donald Trump doing? He's raising tariffs on goods from Canada and Mexico. That's going to raise prices for people. So we need to make sure that we're communicating properly. I think that's one of the big challenges that we had in this last election. Our message wasn't right. It's not that our policies aren't right, but the Republicans did a great job of painting Democrats into a corner, talking about issues that sometimes don't matter to most of the public. I think we need to be squarely on working families and what's good for them.
Yeah, okay. But if you look at some of the things that Joe Biden accomplished, he was focused on working families. The messaging was crap. Working families didn't feel like they were being helped. Sadly, even when programs are passed in Washington, it takes a year or two for the program to actually get off the ground and start functioning. And in the interim, you have to keep telling people what you've done. You have to keep reminding them. And even Jen Psaki, who was a part of the communications team for Joe Biden, has said that they could have done a much better job. I would actually go farther than that and say that they were awful. And despite what you might have heard if you watched that White House press conference, Donald Trump did not win in a landslide. He barely won, like 1.4% over Kamala Harris. He barely won. He does not have a mandate. And don't let anybody tell you he does. Immigration was something we talked about yesterday. Of course, there were raids here in the city of Chicago, and Dr. Phil was apparently out there embedded doing some filming. And if you if you want to hear what the Chicago Tribune thought about that, they did not think that that was an appropriate place. The editorial board, it's getting national coverage, really slammed him. There was something profoundly unsettling about a man who found fame and a huge fortune in our city on the Oprah Winfrey Show. A man who made his bones by offering advice to often vulnerable guests, as a psychotherapist would. Someone who set himself up as an avuncular healer, telling people how to nurture their relationship with their spouse or cope after a relationship falls apart. Dr. Phil is now pushing a new prime time show, and he apparently believes his audience is well served by the former TV healer standing next to the feds and questioning a deportation target without any kind of legal representation. We get why Donald Trump's Department of Justice wants him there. It implies that such people won't just be removed, they'll be humiliated at the same time. Okay. You know, Dr. Oz, Dr. Phil, Oprah's got a lot to apologize for, and I am waiting. She has been really, really quiet about both of these guys. I actually have friends who worked on Dr. Phil's show here in Chicago, and I am telling you, I've known for a long time that this guy is not the nice guy he pretends to be. The words that my friends who worked for him on his show used to describe Dr. Phil cannot be said on the radio. Let me repeat that. My friends who worked on the show at the time when, you know, everybody thought, oh, he was such a great guy, they said very negative things about what he was really like as a human being. So now the world is seeing who he really is. Yay. The phone lines are open, even though I've been yammering away. It's one of the things I do best, don't you think? I yammer. 773-763-9278, 773-763-9278. Send me your texts. Talk to Paul Chaveri. Call on the phone lines and talk to me on the radio. And I actually have a little bit of good news. It's a very, don't get your hopes way up. It's a little tiny bit of good news, but that's how we'll tell you when we come right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Okay, I promised you a little tiny baby bit of good news. You may have seen the big announcement that Target is backing away from DEI. I saw some reasonable posts on social media that said, look, rather than just boycotting Target, Target does promote black-owned businesses. There's a lot of them, female-owned businesses, black-owned businesses. And somebody was posting on social media that while they were no longer going to buy their groceries at Target and a lot of the just regular supplies at Target, that they would still visit Target to support minority-owned businesses, which I think is reasonable. But Costco, I used to have a Costco membership. I let it lapse. I'm renewing it. Because they have doubled down on DEI, and it was announced today that there's another company that has announced that they are not backing away from any of their DEI initiatives, and that is the makeup company e.l.f. So I guess if you're still going to Target to buy things from some of the minority-owned businesses and support small business getting a big break, you can go to the e.l.f. counter and stock up on makeup. Congratulations. But I'm going back to Costco. I am going to renew or re-up my membership. And when I need supplies, I'm going to go there first. And Target is going to get much, much, much less of my business going forward. You got to vote with your dollars as well as in the ballot box. Okay? So a little bit of good news for you. Stock up. Forget about the other brands. Switch over to e.l.f. It's like the cheapest brand, too. It's, I actually buy a couple of their products. They're pretty good. I'm now going to buy a lot more from e.l.f. Okay, let's go to the phone lines. Bonnie's on the line from St. Charles, Illinois. Hey, Bonnie, how are you?
Oh, I'm so glad you're there. Thank you for being there for us. We're all scared and we're angry, and you're our voice. Thank you.
Well, that's very kind of you to say, Bonnie. I'm scared and angry, too.
I worked for Head Start for 25 years and out west of Chicago, and now it's gone. That bastard, he's taken everything down. Why can't we jail him?
Let's hope that with enough public pressure that it will be restored. He wants to hurt people. And Donald Trump has done this before. He'll do something outrageous, and then he'll just see. And if there's enough pushback, then he folds, and then he tells us he never really wanted it anyway. So we shall see. But, Head Start, Meals on Wheels, all of the money that the federal government provides for cancer research is now frozen. These studies are ongoing. You can't just hit the pause button for a month or two. They're either moving forward or they're not. And what are you supposed to do? Pause your data for a month? That's going to make the end result invalid. He's throwing a bunch of stuff at us, wondering what will stick, and we have to make sure none of it sticks. None of it sticks, Bonnie. And
we just got to dig our heels in and fight.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And,
Please stay with us. Don't give up. We need you.
Okay. I will do my darndest, Bonnie. I will do my darndest. And here's what I want from everybody within the sound of my voice. By the end of the day today, I want you to create, either on actual paper or a document on your computer, I want you to know who your state rep is, who your state senator is, and who your congressperson is. And I want you to start interacting with them. They are required. If you are one of their constituents, they'll ask you like your zip code or where you live, because they want to make sure that you're actually one of the people who votes for them. Well, first of all, you won't talk to them. You'll talk to an aide. But they keep a log of every call they get and what that person says. I mean, I called, my congressman is Brad Schneider, and I called him to try to get him to not vote for a certain bill. And he voted for it anyway, but he sent me a 2-page letter. I don't know if he knows I'm on the radio. I don't know if he knows who I am, or I don't know if he just, because I just said I'm one of Congressman Schneider's constituent, and on a House bill, whatever the heck it was, I would like the congressman to vote no, and here's why. Actually, you don't even have to tell them why. They'll record who you are, where you live, and what you want their legislator to do or not do. And I'm telling you, it has power, because they know that for everybody who was motivated to actually pick up the phone and register an opinion, there are probably at least 10 people who feel the same way, who either don't call or don't know how to call or don't want to call. So every phone call has an outsized weight. So that's your homework, kids. Who's your state rep? Who's your state senator? Who's your congressperson? And what are their phone numbers? Okay? Because we're going to have to
call the White House, too. Call the White House. 202-456-1111, Monday through Friday. I do.
Good for you. Good for you. Though I think that while that is important, I think contacting your more direct, more local reps lots of times carries more weight. Because, Donald Trump, he doesn't care about people. He doesn't care about the people who are loyal to him, let alone voters. But you got to do something. And that's something that you can do from the comfort of your home. You don't have to get out. You don't have to canvass. You don't have to go to a meeting.
Right.
So thank you. I'm sorry, Bonnie, that I have used your call for another rant. I will rein myself in.
Thank you. Keep going. Fight on. And
Thank
Chris
you.
Murphy for president.
Yeah, I'm beginning to think so. I'm beginning to think he's the only one that has the spine for it. Oh, Bonnie, thank you so much. Thank you. Let's go now to Park Ridge, Illinois, where Bill is on the line. Hey, Bill, thanks for calling. Bill?
Hello, Joan. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I don't disagree with you about Dr. Phil, because I was always fascinated about his TV program, because he was such a scam artist. He would always direct people to his website, and I don't think people were aware that he was trying to build the number up because he was charging people to advertise on his website. And supposedly he did not have a degree in psychology. Is that correct?
I don't know. I don't know his background. I can't say for sure one way or the other, but I do have the impression that he is very interested in making money and self-promotion. Let's just put it like that.
And then the thing is, I got the biggest kick out of it when his wife got involved with her line of products. And I was like, where did this come from?
And he produces shows with his son. There was a show on CBS for a while that he was executive producer of, along with his son. Yeah, everybody gets a piece of the pie if you're in the Dr. Phil family.
And even his books were not anything that was enlightening or, an informational breakthrough. It was just old stuff that had been, like the diet book that he had. It was amazing, all the different things. And then it was interesting because I don't think he could make a a psychological evaluation of people, because I thought he was sued by someone, and they found out that he didn't have the credentials. And then what he would do is, in order to avoid being caught up in any lawsuit, he would put these people into these clinics that I guess did have the great qualifications to make diagnosis. Anyway, it was just fascinating to see how he worked, and it was appalling, to be honest with you, at the end when you saw the way he was shifting funds or collecting money.
Well, like I say, I had friends who worked for him, and they had nothing good to say about him. So my perspective of Dr. Phil is colored. And I, even without my friends saying things, he just wasn't my kind of guy. He rubbed me the wrong way from the get-go.
And I agree with you on that, because you are absolutely right. It's just, like I said, it was interesting to see how he worked, and I couldn't believe that all these people, fell for it. But anyway.
Well, that's the magic of television. It gives you a credibility that is sometimes undeserved. There was a Chicago Tribune columnist a million years ago who wrote about people who were on television, and he said that if you were on television, you started to give out invisible rays. He said that's the only way he could account for the way people reacted to people who'd been on television. He said that he was in an airport, and he saw a really, really famous author who everybody was ignoring. But he said there was a second-rate comedian, but the comedian had made his name on television. And he said people were fawning all over the comedian and completely ignoring the much, much more famous writer who was sitting right there. And he decided then that it was, when you're on television, you give out invisible rays, and people react to that. It's as good an explanation as any. Anyway, we've got to get to a break. Thank you so very much.
Thank you for taking my call, Joan.
Sure.
I love your show, too, by the way.
Thanks. Appreciate that. Okay, we're going to take a break. We're going to be back with more after this.
Don't turn that dial.
A dangerous mistake to make.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive, returns right now on WCPT 820.
I had David Hochberg on yesterday, and we filled the entire hour with your questions, so I didn't get a chance to ask him why he started saying .com. And I wonder, when I do the live reads of his commercials, does he want me to say .com? Probably he's doing it for the very reason I'm talking about it now. It kind of makes it stand out, even if it is a little bit silly. But then David Hochberg's a little bit silly. Don't tell him I said so. Let's go back to the phone lines. Bob is on the line from Indiana. Hello, Bob.
Hello, Joni.
How you doing?
Well, I hope everybody's happy that's voted for the yellow cock-a-doodle-doo sucker now as he's beginning his reign of terror. Hey, but I do.
I can't believe that they are. I can't believe that people went to the polls and said, yeah, I want a guy who's brave enough to get rid of Meals on Wheels and Head Start. That's my guy. I can't wrap my head around that, Bobby. It causes me physical pain.
How many years to know this guy was anathema? I guess that's the right way to say it. I mean, I can't see how anybody could have pulled that lever that way, but they did. And I don't think we're going back. And I did call my congressman yesterday and told him how I felt about this and what I thought they should do. And, of course, I call them fairly regularly. Half the time they don't even ask for my name, or they tell me what my name is, But yeah, I don't know. But I do have a little good news.
Yeah, what?
Well, I got my big $24 a month raise from Social Security.
Jeez.
And I just heard, from the park here, and I got my $45 a month rent increase starting in March. So, but I got going to get a little assistance from my sister. But, of course, everything changes when he starts cutting into Soch. So,
yeah. I can't. I don't know what to say about this. I mean, the chaos, I think, is definitely meant to. I think he wants people so confused and outraged. He presents so many horrible things that I think the thinking is, well, they can't go after everything. So, even though I don't get everything I want, some of the horrible things I want will definitely go through. I mean, that's the only thing that makes sense to me.
Well, yeah. And like you say, he's creating this storm. Thunderstorm of legislation.
Well, it isn't even legislation, Bobby. He's doing this all by executive order.
That's right.
Which means that it's just...
Sorry.
Yeah, it would be different if this was passed by Congress and the Senate. But this is all just, hey, today I think I'm going to do this, and he writes it up, and we've got to go to court over everything.
Right.
There's got to be a court case for each and every one of these damn executive orders.
But he's just doing it in such a whirlwind of it.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's and kind of like what you said, that hoping that the people won't notice the tornado of a tax cut for his rich people hidden in the middle of it, so that by the time the storm passes, they'll say, "Was that a tornado that went through here?"
Mm-hmm.
and it'll be a got you thing. And he'll figure that, and the way things usually go, people they'll just sit down and take it.
God, I hope not.
Well,
I hope not, Bobby. Listen, while you and I were talking, I'm getting a lot of calls, and we're coming up on 3:00. So I'm gonna wrap our conversation up to see if I can squeeze some more of these folks in here before we have to go to news. Take care, my friend.
Bye-bye.
I'm glad your sister's looking out for you. Okay, let's see. Let's go to Wisconsin. Bill is on the line. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Joan. I'm calling in because I use an Echo device to listen to you folks. All of a sudden, it got cut off. And I've tried to reconnect. Right now, I've been listening on an app on my iPhone, but the tune-in is not coming through. And I'm not the least bit surprised if there isn't some censorship going on.
Well,
and I would call in and pass that along, because this is very Orwellian.
I'm actually, when we break for news, I will write an email to our IT department and have them look into that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the call. I appreciate that. Let's go to Oak Lawn. Nancy is on the line. Hey, Nancy, how are you?
Not good, Joan, and people probably aren't going to want to hear what I have to say.
Oh, go for it.
First of all, before I say anything, because people misunderstand, when my friends even, when I start talking to them. Anyway, the first thing I'm going to say is I will defend my country to my death. And guess what? It's going to be coming. We're all going to get in another civil war, because I'll tell you why. We have had unequal representation and no representation for over 60 years now. And now the Democrats are turning around and saying, oh, we got to do something about this. Really? You know, we would have never seen the likes of the felon. I refuse to say his name. I've got names for him, but I can't say him on the radio. We would have never seen the likes of the two Bushes. Even the Dems we've had in the last 50 years have been, you know, Obama completely wasted his second term. But by not telling us who actually killed Kennedy, by allowing Nixon to get off scot-free and not prosecuting him, that set the dominoes, you know, going. Because
yeah, you know, both John Dean and Jill Wine-Banks, I was at a 50th anniversary for Watergate, and they both said to the audience that it was a mistake. They understood why Gerald Ford did what he did, pardoning Nixon at the time, but that with 2020 hindsight, it was a mistake. And, you know, a lot of people take President Obama to task for not taking any kind of action against George Bush because of some of the misinformation that led us into Iraq. So you're right. I mean, we didn't get here overnight. We've been building this coffin for a long time.
That's right, and we don't have anybody fighting for us because, you know, just like when you played Hakeem Jeffries' rant about how they're going to not let them take Social Security and Medicare. Where the hell was he 8 and 10 months ago when he should have been screaming about this? Democrats always close the door after the horses are out of the barn. And that's just the way it is. We are not being represented.
We do not organize. When President Obama was elected to his first term, there was, and I think it might have been at this time of the inauguration, there was a high-level Republican powwow in a private room at a local D.C. restaurant. Kevin McCarthy was there. I can't remember who else was there. And they planned out how they were going to fight Obama at every turn. Where was the Democratic powwow when Donald Trump got elected? Where was the private meeting of the leaders planning out how we are going to fight tooth and nail in this administration?
Oh, never mind that. You know, Donald Trump should have never shown up in the first place. They could have gotten rid of him the first time around. And because they still don't know how to fight, we are stuck with wimpy Democrats. And, you know, there's not enough.
And, you know, when it comes to Donald Trump, the Republicans are wimpy as well, because they've had several opportunities to get rid of Donald Trump once and for all, and they have folded each and every time. They are such a spineless group. I don't know if you saw this news reporting. You know, Pete Hegseth's former sister-in-law revealed that, you know, his former wife was frightened of him and, you know, really was not physically abused, but emotionally abused, and was really scared of him and his drinking. And Tillis, Senator Tom Tillis, senator from North Carolina, told her that if she was willing to go public with this, that he would vote against Hegseth's confirmation. One more Republican senator would have kept Hegseth from the DOD. Mitch McConnell, believe it or not, voted against him. Lisa Murkowski, Susan Collins, and that was it. Tom Tillis voted to confirm Hegseth. They're just spineless and lying. And I apologize.
You know why McConnell voted against him.
Again?
You know why McConnell voted against him? Because he knew that he would still get voted in because of the 50-50 split.
Tillis would have been the deciding vote. with only 3 Republicans voting against Hegseth, there was an even split, and J.D. Vance cast the tie-breaking vote. Tillis would have made the difference.
That's the reason McConnell voted against him, because he knew he would still get through.
I know. Well, that's quite possible. Nancy, I got to go. I'm sorry to the other callers. Again, I'm a little bit wound up today. I will find my Zen spot, my happy place, when we take a break for news, and I'll be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Recently, I had an interesting conversation with Chris Lehman, who's the D.C. bureau chief and columnist for The Nation magazine, and we ran out of time. I asked Chris if he would be willing to come back and spend a little bit more time with us. Chris, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, happy to be here, Joan. Thanks for having me back.
Well, I'm very happy you're here. I want to talk about some of the things you've been writing about, but I feel that the sky is falling, and I knew this was going to happen. And even in Trump's first run at the presidency, when he didn't know what he was doing, he tried to throw a bunch of stuff at us, and a lot of it was delayed or beaten back. This time, last time it felt like he was throwing spaghetti against the wall. This time it feels like a tsunami. And I think that's because there are people more experienced and smarter than he is who are actually behind most of this. What's your reaction? Oh, my God, it's only Tuesday, Chris.
Yeah, well, my reaction is much the same as yours. I think I may have said this the last time I was on. The first Trump administration, there wasn't, a widespread expectation even on his campaign that he was going to win. And I don't think he was prepared for taking power and all that goes with it. The old thought in Washington is personnel is policy. And he wound up with a lot of sort of establishment Republican picks in key cabinet posts, like Rex Tillerson, Jeff Sessions for as long as he lasted, Mattis at the Defense Department or at head of the chief of staff. So, I think Trump and the MAGA movement have been preparing for the 4 years they've been out of power for just this moment to make sure that not only the cabinet is staffed with hardline MAGA loyalists, but the entire government. And that's, we saw that in the initial burst of executive orders, including a still to be tested order to move a lot of the federal workforce onto at-will employment under what's called Federal X or Schedule F. I'm used to talking about Elon Musk, I guess, on the civil service roster. So, there's a purge underway, and we've seen, most dramatically in yesterday's insane OMB cessation of all federal grants while the new administration reviews them essentially for ideological purity. It's an unprecedented power grab from the executive branch. It's clearly unconstitutional. Congress has the powers of the purse. And, Trump is just basically saying, I can spend all this money the way I want to.
That's the thing I don't understand. Obviously, executive orders exist. Obviously, presidents can issue executive orders. But in the past, it seems to me that presidents have been careful to write executive orders that they are actually legally allowed to do. Donald Trump seems to be just writing executive orders on a whim. Oh, you know what? I'd really like a freeze on all federal spending. Yeah, let's put it into effect today at 5. Excuse me, give me that executive order. Let me write this up. So what has to happen? Does each and every one of these then have to be court challenged? Clearly there's nobody in the Trump administration that says, you know what? That's really not legal. You really can't write an executive order, making Joan Esposito's birthday a national holiday. That just isn't what you've got the power to do. He doesn't care. So right. Does that mean that we have to, put together this big pot of money to fund an incredible, deep team of lawyers to take each and every one of these things to court?
It looks that way. I would back up a little bit and say that this is not done by whim. This is all in Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation playbook for a second Trump term that Trump dishonestly claimed had nothing to do with his reelection campaign. The memo from the Office of Management and Budget that came down late yesterday, announcing this halt to federal grants, the metadata shows that two apparatchiks from Project 2025 actually drafted the memo. So this is, very, very clear. And the Trump's nominee to head the OMB for the second term is the same guy he had in the position his first term, Russell Vought, who has written extensively about how he believes the Federal Empowerment and Control Act of 1974, which was a post-Watergate reform enacted by Congress to prevent just this sort of mischief from the lawless Nixon administration, which was, on a lesser scale, trying to subvert congressional spending directives in a similar fashion. Vought views the Impoundment Act as itself being unconstitutional. It's completely, I can't say on the radio what word leaps to mind, but it is a bizarre, let's say, interpretation of constitutional law. But it is something that, they believe will withstand court challenges, especially given, any court challenge will go all the way to the Supreme Court. And we know what this Supreme Court is capable of. It has 3 Trump appointees on it. It is the most hard-right court in modern history. This is a basic separation of powers issue, and I would hope that even this court could recognize that. But I'm not, I can't never say never when it comes to the Roberts Court.
I think the Roberts Court is in a bit of a quandary because on the one hand, they clearly think like Donald Trump thinks, and they want to give him a path to do what he wants to do. But, Chris, if they roll over on executive order after executive order, they are going to delegitimize themselves. Donald Trump would love nothing more than for the Supreme Court to be a rubber stamp for whatever he wants to do. Do you think their egos will permit that?
Well, that is the question of the moment. And as I was saying, I can't with confidence, forecast that they will stand up to him. They, have in limited ways thwarted some of his more insane initiatives in the past. So, there is already, I think a tremendous popular backlash. And there's already a hearing in D.C. federal court, in about an hour to put a stop to this insane directive. So that would start the process of a Supreme Court review if it doesn't go in Trump's favor and they appeal it, which this is a Biden appointee who's hearing the case in D.C. federal court. So Trump likely will not prevail, given that it is a baldly unconstitutional power grab. So yeah.
I'm curious. You said it's going to be heard in court. Since the DOJ now belongs to Trump, who's bringing this case? I mean, is this Mark Elias and the Democracy docket? Is this the ACLU?
I think it was a national. If I'm maybe mixing up things I saw speed by on social media, so don't hold me to this. But I think it was a national board of nonprofits that brought the original challenge because there are a lot of nonprofit outfits that do essential sort of compassionate charitable work that receive massive federal grants. Meals on Wheels is one of them.
Meals on Wheels. Yeah, Head Start.
And, to say nothing of Medicaid, which is a source of basic health care support for the very sort of, especially red state working populations.
But Chris, the angry blonde woman said that the Medicaid thing was just a glitch, and that payments are still being made, and it should be up and running in a couple of hours. That's what the angry blonde woman said.
Well, the numerous elected officials are testifying very much to the contrary, that the Medicaid online portal is down, payments are not going through. And, this is another thing to keep in mind about the Trump administration. They can and will lie about anything. To go back to your original point about, what is the sort of threadbare legal rationale for any of these executive orders, and it's all, this ideologically, and this is all in Project 2025 as well, an ideologically driven claim to emergency powers under, in the case of documented immigration, it's being termed an invasion. So there, are insane war powers being claimed on the part of the federal government, and that's why Trump wants to deputize, the military essentially to engage in mass deportations, which is, call things by their true names. That is fascism. And that is, and the rest of this, if you read the 2-page memo from the OMB rationalizing, the cessation of federal grants, it's saying that, the runaway bureaucracy is touting Marxist DEI initiatives and, transgender, discrimination. It's just, this culture war. Again, I can't say the word on the radio, but, the red meat that the MAGA movement and Project 2025 has been mobilizing all this time. So none of it is, real. There is no emergency generated by the recognition of equality for trans individuals. It's just a civil rights accommodation. The end.
And I appreciate your dog speaking the words that neither you nor I can say. And I say, you go, dog. We're right there with you. Chris Lehman and I are going to take a break. He's the D.C. bureau chief and columnist for The Nation magazine. He and I and his dog will be right back after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And joining me is Chris Lehman, who's the D.C. bureau chief and a columnist for The Nation magazine. Chris, you probably heard, it was announced a little while ago, that Google Maps has decided that they are going to capitulate or flatter Donald Trump, and they are going to rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America, and they are also going to rename Denali in Alaska, referring to its previous name, Mount McKinley. I have to say, in the news break leading up to our interview, I went on my phone and I deleted Google Maps. Apple Maps, that's just fine. I can rely on Apple Maps. So far, Apple isn't doing a major capitulation. Donald Trump didn't pick up the phone and call the CEO of Google and say, hey, dude, do me a favor, do me a solid here, start changing your app. Why are people who don't have to capitulating to him? Do they think that's going to put them in some sort of favorable position?
Well, the short answer is yes, they do. It's called obedience. And I hate to break the news to you, but Tim Cook was also at the inauguration. So,
he was at the inauguration, but so far, Apple has not backed off their public DEI policies. So I'm taking the little victories where I can take them up.
I totally understand it. Yeah. And it is true that, all of the, Fortune 500 companies who made a point of withholding donations to the Republican Party after January 6th have done a total about-face. that, to my mind, is more I mean, yeah, the Google Maps thing is insane and ridiculous, and it's a crappy search engine now, and it's also a crappy map app. But it is, it is this pattern of anticipatory obedience. We saw it with Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post. We saw it with Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook. And, what all of these concerns have in common is that they're run by billionaires sitting atop, huge government contracts that, stand to make out mandates for a Trump administration. Elon Musk, who contributed $277 million to Trump's reelection campaign, the largest single donation by any individual in American history, has seen his fortune grow by $222 billion. That's billion with a B since Election Day.
That's a good return on investment.
Yeah. And it is very alarming that we're seeing the convergence of a more ideologically rigid and disciplined and vengeful Trump administration backed by the entire, U.S. business establishment, pretty much. That is, again, something that occurs under fascism. The Ruhr Valley industrialists in Nazi Germany were just fine with having Hitler run the country because it was good for business. I don't mean to, I'm in a bad mood, obviously. But
the parallels are obvious, and I don't think we should back away from them. I mean, the oligarch, though the wealthy billionaire class, is right there with him every step of the way. There appear to be an astonishing number of believers who are willing to twist the law and twist our government to get what they want. I mean, let's face it. I mean, the slogan should be "Make America White Again," because that seems to really be what they're nudge, nudge, wink, wink. Let's get rid of DEI. We don't want you to feel like you ever lost a job to somebody because they were a woman or a person of color. So this is going to give you the power again. I don't know. Maybe I'm crankier than you are, Chris.
No, I think we're equally cranky. It's also the logic behind getting rid of birthright citizenship, which is,
which he can't do.
It is also flagrantly unconstitutional. If the Supreme Court upholds that, it's kind of game over for our democracy. But, all of these things are being aggressively put forward, again, under the Project 2025 playbook. And, it is sort of up to the courts at this point, which is not what you want in a democracy. You want, and this is another problem we're having right now, is the Democratic Party is not acting very effectively as an opposition party. It's a dramatic contrast to the first Trump term where he imposed a Muslim ban right away and there were mass protests and, Democratic members of Congress joined those protests and denounced in the most forceful terms imaginable, what was happening. And now it's a very faint and belated, it was only today that Democratic officials in Washington convened a press conference to denounce the January 6th pardons, which happened a week ago, and, have, been sadly kind of overtaken in this insane news cycle by the OMB memo. And you can't be this sort of slow to move in a response to
that is something that seems so obvious to me. Trust me, if we opened up the phone lines, you would hear that over and over again from our callers. It's something that's clear to you, and yet I've talked about this practically since the election. Where's the plan? Where was the leadership that met and said, how are we going to fight this every step of the way? How are we going to do this? Let's come up with a plan, and we're all going to stick to it. I mean, heck, they're not even, with the exception of Chris Murphy, who's been, shouting loud and long. Where are they? What's the plan? Who's leading?
It is a very good question, especially given, the prominence of Project 2025 in the Harris campaign. They went out correctly, in my view, and said, look, this is the blueprint. This is the danger before us. And then they lost the election, and, suddenly they're not acting as though there is an existential danger to our democracy when there clearly is. I think the short answer is, there is no short answer. There's, a sort of sclerotic senior leadership in the Congressional Democratic Party that, blocked AOC from becoming the ranking member of the Oversight Committee, and the senior person, Jerry Conley, who got that post, has, I think, literally been on television once since.
Oh, yeah. And that was, supposedly from the get-go, AOC and Nancy Pelosi did not see eye to eye. Nancy's very strategic and knows how the game is played. And AOC, I think she felt was a little bit wet behind the ears and just wanted everything and didn't understand how anything happened. And from what I read, it was Nancy Pelosi making calls that led to AOC losing that particular vote. At the time, I can't remember his name. He's 74 years old. He's a white man. Yeah. And he's suffering from esophageal cancer. But everybody's like, oh, you just don't understand. He's a real fighter. He'll get out there and he knows, and he's going to be great. Where's he been? I'm sorry. Did I miss it?
I will glumly report that I got an email press release from his office yesterday, just before all of this latest horrific news broke, and it ran under the headline, Oversight Ranking Member Connolly gives the Trump administration some A's on his first week report card. And I'm just like, I, again, cursed in a very, pronounced way that I can't replicate here. But, this is what we've got for a Democratic leadership, and it's not meeting the moment. It is, it might have been savvy, 30 years ago, but our politics have changed fundamentally since 2016. And the Democrats.
And you know what? I got to say, even though she doesn't have the leadership title, AOC has been posting as she does. I mean, she's brilliant at social media, and she's been doing interviews like with Jon Stewart. She posts on social media and she says what we're all thinking. This is what's going on, kids. The rich people are taking over.
Yep. And, this has to be, even now, the messages I'm been seeing coming out of congressional leaders are things like, which are undeniably true, that, this is an abrogation of the separation of powers, and, Congress needs to battle back to reclaim its authority on these matters. But what's really happening on the ground is that people relying on Head Start and Meals on Wheels and Medicaid are not getting their payments because of the actions of a billionaire White House. That is not a hard message, in my view, to get out in front of. That is what is actually happening. These, again, are the people who have been defecting from the Democratic Party from over the last 3 election cycles, and this is a way to get them back, to fight for them.
What a concept, Chris. Oh, my God. Yeah. You should write about that. Oh, wait, you kind of have. Oh, Chris Lehman and I are going to take a break. Hey, when we come back, you wrote about J.D. Vance. I want to talk about J.D. Vance when we come right back after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
And I'm joined by Chris Lehman, who's the D.C. bureau chief and a columnist for The Nation magazine. Earlier in January, you wrote about the age of Vanceism is just beginning. Donald Trump, being the narcissist in chief, doesn't even seem to want Elon Musk around all that much anymore. Why do you think J.D. Vance is going to be influential?
Well, I think for a number of reasons. One is, you're right. Trump isn't that much, has never been very interested in sort of the actual business of governance. And J.D. Vance, unlike Mike Pence, was, sort of brought on as a hardcore ideological enforcer of the MAGA faith. Mike Pence was a sop to reassure evangelical conservatives that Trump was one of the. That reassurance, alas, is no longer needed. The evangelical vote broke for Trump at something like 89% in 2024. So now, again, this goes back to the contrast between the second Trump term and the first. Trump wants someone who is going to be a loyal, sort of lapdog, and who is also steeped in the ideology of MAGAism, which, ironically, because J.D. Vance was famously a never-Trumper during the 2016 election, but he has the zeal of the converts, and he is out there. He said at the or the anti-choice rally, I should say, that he more American babies. This is like the natalist motif that now runs through Vance's thoughts, and it is entirely in line with all of these proto-authoritarian, let's call it, strains in the Trump administration. And Vance is very well positioned to be the public face of that and to sort of, be the ideological disciplinarian. And also, as we saw in Pete Hegseth's nomination, Vance cast the deciding vote to get, this accused sexual assaulter and Fox News personality in charge of the largest, government bureaucracy in the world. So, yeah, J.D. Vance is going to be where the action is. And J.D. Vance is a self-confessed, true believer of all the alt-rights, currents and
because it's convenient for now. I don't think J.D. Vance has any hard and fast beliefs about anything. I think J.D. Vance is somebody who sees which direction the wind is coming from, and that's suddenly where J.D. Vance happens to find himself. I think he is a complete empty suit.
Well, I would largely agree, but I would say he's a very dangerous empty suit. He was the empty suit who actually Elon Musk and Donald Trump Jr. persuaded Trump to add to the ticket. And he is a creature both of, the Silicon Valley, edgelord world, as I now call it, and the hard alt-rights movement. And he nets those key constituencies together in a way that they don't believe he's an empty suit. They believe he is, a diehard true believer, and he is able to act and talk like one, which is all that's really required. And he is going to, I think, he's going to be much more of a Dick Cheney figure than a Kamala Harris figure or a Mike Pence type. He's going to be a center of ideological discipline in the Trump White House. I think we're already seeing that happen.
Do you think he is assuming that, as old and as relatively unhealthy as Trump is, that it's distinctly possible that he will rise to the presidency?
I think, yeah, though I think, it could be a distinction without a difference. I think, Vance is already, sort of going to be running, key MAGA initiatives out of the vice president's office. I think, he was already given sort of a foreign policy portfolio to work on during the campaign, and that's, he's a proud sort of isolationist who famously said he doesn't care what happens in Ukraine, and I think, it's going to be a really dark portfolio of power that's going to fall into his lap.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I also predicted when J.D. Vance was named as Donald Trump's running mate that if Donald Trump won the presidency, he better make sure that J.D. Vance isn't allowed in the White House at night, because can't you just see J.D. Vance sneaking up to Trump's bedroom and, trying to smother him with a pillow? He seems exactly like the kind of guy who would feel comfortable with that kind of an action.
Yeah, though I don't think it's really necessary in this case. I think he's already got much more power than he ever dreamed of when he was at Yale Law School and supporting his then trans friends. It is a remarkable transformation he's already undergone, and he's reaping the benefits, and he will I think someone who is as dramatic a sycophant as Vance is doesn't need to resort to, sort of
smothering him. You don't think he needs to smother him?
No, he's already got the favor of Trump. Ever since he ran afoul with Pence, has wanted a lickspittle, kind of sycophant in the role of the vice presidency, and he's got it. So everyone's happy.
I am talking with Chris Lehman, who writes for The Nation. We are going to take a break, and when we come back, Chris, your most recent article, at least the most recent one I've got, is on, I don't know how you say his last name, Ross Ulbricht?
Albrecht, I believe.
Albrecht. When we come back, this is a really this one was a head scratcher when Trump offered him a pardon. I want to talk about who this guy is and why you think he got a pardon when we come right back.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
Chris Lehman writes for The Nation, and one of his most recent articles is about, to me, one of the more surprising pardons that Donald Trump issued to a guy who's a really bad guy in a lot of different ways. Chris, talk about that if you would.
Sure. Ross Ulbricht was the founder of Silk Road, which was this dark web bazaar, basically that trafficked mostly in illegal drugs. There were also hacking contracts and other nefarious activities transacted on the site. He was convicted in 2013, I think, on all kinds of drug racketeering charges. It also came to light in his trial that he appeared to approve several contract murders of people who were one was an employee who was arrested and who Ulbricht was afraid would divulge compromising evidence. The other person was just apparently it was a catfishing scheme, I should stipulate, and none of these murders appear to have been carried out. But, it's pretty damning when you have electronic communications that, in one exchange with an aspiring contract hitman, Ulbricht is troubleshooting a chat app for the Hells Angels, who this guy claimed to be a part of, and then says, oh, and by the way, I deposited $500,000 in Bitcoins for you to carry out this murder. Yeah, you're right. This is not my idea of it's not Leonard Petalier who was unjustly convicted on trumped-up charges and was pardoned by Biden. This is a bad actor. And you can argue that his sentence was too heavy, which I think it probably was, but that's sort of what the appellate process is for. And Trump, went even further. Trump basically delivered this pardon because he promised it before the Libertarian Party convention over the summer, and wanted to prevent a Libertarian spoiler candidate like Gary Johnson, diminishing his prospects for re-election. And the Libertarians loved it. He's been a hero of theirs, Ulbricht, that is, and But what's interesting is, he promised at the time to commute Ulbricht's sentence, which I think could have been more defensible, perhaps. But he wound up giving him a full pardon.
But, Ulbricht was never, I believe, from what I read previously, when Ulbricht was sentenced, the judge took these accusations that he had facilitated a number of hits, though none of the hits apparently ever came to fruition, like you said. The judge took that information as part of what he used to give this guy the sentence. Unless I'm mistaken, I don't believe there's a statute of limitations on murder. I don't know if attempted murder counts. Couldn't new charges be brought against this guy for the alleged hits?
It doesn't seem like there was a Maryland. The one alleged is especially complicated because it involves a corrupt DEA agent who stole money and made it seem that this employee I mentioned earlier was responsible for the theft and staged a fake murder of the guy who collects initially from Ulbricht. So, yeah, there's a big problem there with, fruit of the poison tree, obviously, with a federal agent acting badly and in bad faith. So there was the Maryland court. This guy was the agent was based in Baltimore, and the Maryland court dismissed the contract killing charge with prejudice because of this guy's terrible conduct, which, is again a defensible position. So it's unlikely that the murder charges will be revived, especially since it is this weird nether zone where apparently it's unclear. This other case involves I think Canadians, and there does not appear to have been an actual murder carried out. So there's conspiracy, obviously, and it is not good. Mm-hmm. And it's the other reason I think the Ulbricht's pardon is telling is, the new Trump administration is so gung-ho on board with the crypto world, and all the Silk Road's transactions pretty much were conducted via cryptocurrency because it's easy to transact across national borders and very hard for investigators to trace. And, Ulbricht is also a hero to the crypto world, who Donald Trump is extravagantly fucking up to. He did
it's so funny that you mentioned this, because I saw, I wish I'd have saved it. Donald Trump, of course, has created his own crypto thing, and trust me, I know nothing of what I'm talking about right now when it comes to this. To me, it's all invisible. It's all invisible and doesn't really exist. But apparently Donald Trump created some kind of crypto something or other, and one of the big crypto investors posted on social media, "This looks really bad for us. It makes it look like we're all scam artists." And somebody reposted with that, and it's like, this is just too good not to share.
Yeah. Now it is sort of telling that, Donald Trump is a grifter too far for the crypto community. But yeah, he is aggressively romancing them. One of his first week's executive orders sort of undid the debanking restrictions for the crypto industry that previously existed. He got rid of Gary Gensler, the Biden head of the SEC, who was, aggressive and properly so in prosecuting crypto offenses. So it is, and Bitcoin prices have rocketed sky high ever since Trump won the election. So, yeah, it's going to be I think a short-term boom for the crypto industry, because crypto is inherently volatile and it's not based on any actual productive economic activity. So it's going to wildly, go up and down in price. But right now it's in a boom phase because they have Donald Trump doing their bidding.
Chris, I don't know if you saw this. A friend shared it with me that there's apparently a new Reuters poll out, and the American people already don't like pretty much most of what he's doing. They don't like these new government freezes. They don't like the pardons. They don't like the tariffs. They don't like ending birthright citizenship. They don't like ending federal efforts to hire women or minorities. They really don't like renaming the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. And I'm talking like high 50s to high 70s don't like on these issues. Is this going to have any effect on anybody other than you and me?
Well, it should. And again, I think the Democrats have to seize these opportunities right now.
Low-hanging fruit.
If this were an actual opposition party, the path forward is pretty clear. This is a guy who ran on a promise to deliver broad-based prosperity to working Americans, and he's, renaming the Gulf of Mexico and doing the oligarchs' bidding, and, by the way, the price of eggs, which was a big symbol, for the Biden inflationary policies in MAGA land, is skyrocketing back up because of bird flu, and Trump is, taking it, the United States out of the WHO, that is not a recipe to respond effectively to pandemics, So, it's all out there in the open at this moment. And the Democrats really need to get out in front and, make the case not just that Donald Trump is, flouting norms or doing things improperly, but that he is hurting working Americans. Again, it doesn't seem like it should be hard.
It doesn't seem like it should be hard. Is there anyone you've seen? Because I know when Trump was first elected, we heard some pretty strong statements both from Gavin Newsom and J.B. Pritzker, but even they, now maybe Gavin Newsom's been a little distracted with the fires, but even they really haven't kept up a drumbeat. This needs to be a drumbeat. You know how Republicans all get on the same page and all give the same message over and over and over again? That's what we need to do.
Well, you mentioned Chris Murphy. I would say Jamie Raskin has also been really good, getting out in front of these things. The other thing that I saw Jamie Raskin make a very good point about is, that South Korea did a very good job, right, as all this crap is happening in the United States, of convicting and, jailing essentially their leader who staged a phony insurrection, and it's sort of a shaming example. So it is, part of the problem is, Trump was impeached twice in his first term. He's committed, I can't even give a rough count, but I would guess at least a dozen impeachable offenses in his first week. And the Democrats, obviously don't have majorities to start impeachment proceedings right now, but they need to.
But, in South Korea, one of the really important factors in this, the way this would-be fascist was brought to justice, was that the members of his own party told him they would not support what he was doing. Can you imagine who's going to? Lindsey Graham, is he going to stand up to Donald Trump? Who's it going to be? Who's it going to be?
Yeah, that is a good question. We don't even have Mitt Romney to give, anguish talking points anymore. It is, that is a huge problem. It's also why the system worked during Watergate was Howard Baker and the Republicans on Capitol Hill told Nixon, you're going to get impeached and there's nothing we can do. This is a very different Republican party. It's an authoritarian cult. They're afraid of stepping out of line because they'll be punished by primary challenges and Elon Musk's money now. So, it's going to be you can't expect anything from the Republicans, but you do need Democrats to get out there and to raise holy hell. That's the only path forward. You can't as we were discussing earlier, you can't count on the Roberts Court. They're not going to, be the last bulwark. So, yeah, you need to fight, fire with fire, and you need to fight bad politics with good politics.
You have, in addition to everything else, you have also written about the media. I am coming to the conclusion that it is the smaller, more independent outlets like The Nation that we are going to have to turn to because, the New York Times, I gave up on them a while ago, and I am hanging on to my Washington Post subscription by a thread, hoping Kara Swisher puts together that investor group and takes it off Bezos's hands before I finally give up. But it just seems like our major institutions, and not just the corporations, but the media institutions are really, really afraid of Donald Trump and are capitulating. I don't think they're going to be our salvation.
No, they definitely aren't. And, it is striking that these papers that, realized a, quote, Trump bump after the first, after Trump's first election victory in 2016 are all kowtowing to him now. And, the Washington Post, which is my hometown paper, and it's the reason I live in Washington was I was hired by the Post in 2000. I came there because of the Graham family and, the fact that it was a newspaper that, brought down a corrupt presidency and was, owned by a family tradition I felt I could trust. And that's all obliterated. It's all, Jeff Bezos is not, anything close to a reliable guardian of our embattled democracy. He's another billionaire shill looking out for, the main chance to expand his fortune.
You don't. I mean, it was pretty obvious. I mean, the same week that he killed the Kamala Harris endorsement, Donald Trump was looking over Blue Origin. I mean, he would love to replace SpaceX as NASA's favorite private rocket company. And if he has to sacrifice the Washington Post to make it happen, so be it.
Yeah, the Washington Post is, couch cushion money for Jeff Bezos. And, it's both Blue Origins and his AWS tech project, which has massive government contracts. And, Trump threatened those contracts during his first term when he didn't like the way the Washington Post was covering him. And Jeff Bezos evidently got that message. It is bad. The de facto press slogan was during the first Trump administration was the Washington Post, in my view, rather pompous slogan, democracy dies in darkness. And now the Washington Post wants to adopt a new slogan, which is riveting storytelling for all of America.
That moves people.
Yeah, exactly. And somehow yet more pompous and completely content-free.
Yeah.
There's nothing good will come of that slogan. So,
do you think if Kara puts together a group of investors that Bezos will sell? I mean, it seems at this point that the Washington Post is more of a drag on what he wants to do rather than anything that's helping him.
I don't think that's really true. I think, Bezos, all billionaires have, bizarre hobby horses and sources of intellectual vanity. And, as you mentioned, like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos is obsessed with space exploration and wants to do whatever, terraform a new society out in outer space. But he also, built his fortune as a books guy, and he likes to think of himself as a serious intellectual figure, even though he's not. And he's, just another. I mean, this is the big picture. This is what happens when we deliver, precious resources and institutions into the hands of billionaires. They're not answerable to anyone, and they will do what they want with their designated playthings. And I think Bezos, got a Rupert Murdoch lackey to be his publisher and hired another Rupert Murdoch lackey to be the new editor, and that's the world he wants, and he has the money to make sure it happens. So I don't know what his incentive to sell is. I don't think he's involved in day-to-day operations at the Post, and it's not much of a headache to him, but it's delivering him what he wants. It burnishes his vanity while now serving his broader economic interests in Washington. So it's heartbreaking because, it's my hometown paper.
Yeah.
I like the Post.
And there's so many people who write for it who I have really enjoyed and respected, which is why I'm kind of trying to hang on. And for those of you who don't know who Kara Swisher is, she was reporting on the internet and tech before the rest of us even knew what was going on. She wrote a really cool book recently. It's called Burn Book. And she knew all these people when they were nobody, when they were scrambling. And by the way, she said when she first met Jeff Bezos, she described him as feral. Chris Lehman and his dog are welcome back here anytime, particularly the dog. Not that I don't love you, Chris. Thank you so much.
Washington, if you want a friend in Washington, get a dog. So.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Thank you so much. Chris Lehman, D.C. Bureau Chief and columnist for The Nation. We are going to take a break for news. We'll be back with more after this.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am very pleased to be joined by Adam Serwer, who you may know if you subscribe to The Atlantic magazine. He's a staff writer there. Most recently, at least the most recent one that I've seen of Adams is he wrote about the executive order that Donald Trump issued, where he believed with a stroke of a pen he could circumvent the Constitution. I'm, of course, talking about the executive order where he said, birthright citizenship, yeah, I don't like that. We're doing away with that. Adam joins us now to talk about this and all of the other, let's see, what do we call it? Shock and awe, flooding the zone, chaos, come to life, all of the rest of what is going on politically right now. Adam, how are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. You wrote that you think this executive order that supposedly does away with birthright citizenship is going to be a test for the Constitution. I don't disagree, but I honestly can't say for sure what this current Supreme Court will do. Talk about what you wrote.
Well, sorry, one second. There's essentially about 150 years of precedent saying that, anybody born here in the United States who is not, in a specific circumstance, such as, the child of a foreign diplomat is a U.S. citizen. Recently, Republicans have wanted to argue, despite this long history of legal precedent, that this does not apply to legal immigrants. And the logic of their argument is that, the word jurisdiction in the 14th Amendment doesn't apply to undocumented immigrants. Now, that's obviously illogical on its face because, the term jurisdiction applies to the place in which the United States exercises sovereignty. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to charge illegal immigrants with crimes. But they're taking this position because they want to deny undocumented immigrants the children of undocumented immigrants U.S. citizenship and render them stateless in some cases. And the reason for this is that Donald Trump's advisors, or a significant number of them at least, are people who believe that demographic changes in the United States are changing the country for the worse. And this is one way of socially engineering the country to be more like the one that they want it to be. The issue is that, the Constitution is clear, the precedents are clear, and so what you really have to rely on is the sort of partisanship of the justices themselves and their view. They're changing views with regard to wanting to be, in the mainstream of the Republican Party and the conservative movement, and changing, the Constitution essentially to fit with whatever the Republican Party wants at that particular moment. And I don't think we know what the justices are going to do. I don't think, precedent offers too much reassurance that they won't rule in a lawless way. I think we've seen in the past, particularly with the 14th Amendment, they essentially wrote the ban on insurrectionists holding office out of the Constitution. They gave the president an immunity to criminal prosecution that is nowhere in the Constitution and that the founders would have been shocked by. So I think it's unpredictable what the Supreme Court will do in this case, despite the fact that birthright citizenship has meant one thing for about 150 years.
I have been saying for a while that it seems to me that this Roberts Court sort of decides on a partisan basis what they want a certain outcome to be, and then they look at the law and they twist it into whatever pretzel shape is necessary to achieve their goals. Am I being too harsh by saying that?
No, I think that's exactly right. And I think that they have a sort of rhetorical approach, using the philosophy of originalism to say the Constitution means what it meant at the time a certain thing was adopted. Well, if that's the case, then the birthright citizenship issue is an open and shut case, and Trump's going to lose. But I think what we've seen over and over again is that they don't apply that when that would not achieve the result that they want. And instead what they do is as Republicans, as conservatives, they tend to agree with, their fellows. And when their fellows change their minds about certain things, they tend to change their minds with them. So the fact that Trump and now, a lot of other people in the Republican Party who previously held the position that birthright citizenship applies to undocumented immigrants and have now changed their mind in order to be more in sync with Trump, there's nothing to say that the justices themselves won't do the same thing.
Adam, people are always talking about how John Roberts really cares about the legitimacy of the court, and John Roberts really cares about his legacy. But to my observation, he doesn't behave like he cares about those things. What do you see?
Well, I think he does care about those things, but he might interpret things a little differently in terms of, what he thinks will help the legitimacy of the court. And I think if you look at the way that the Trump administration is treating, all the sort of lawless things it's doing right now, they're saying, well, people voted for this, so it's okay. And that's not how it works. The presidents are bound by the law and the Constitution. They're not allowed to just do whatever they want simply because the candidate said, well, I'm going to do whatever I want when he was running for office. Otherwise, constitutional government would have no purpose. The purpose of the Constitution is to set limits on the executive's power and on the power of the other branches of government. Now, in this case, the fact that, Trump seems to be assuming a popular mandate as a result of his very narrow popular vote win, John Roberts might do the same thing. He might, and the other justices might feel the same way. They might say, well, this is what the people wanted, and so we're not going to stand in the way of that because it might damage the legitimacy of the court to do so. Which would be the opposite of what originalists say that they're supposed to do. But the reality is that, what you or I think might help the legitimacy of the court as an institution is not necessarily what the conservative justices on the court think will help the legitimacy of that institution.
I'm talking to Adam Serwer, who's a staff writer at The Atlantic. We are going to be right back after a break.
Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I am joined by Adam Serwer, who writes for The Atlantic. His is this your most recent article, the one about birthright citizenship?
Yes, it is.
I thought that it was so wonderful. You know, it seems to me, and, you know, correct me if I'm wrong, you know, my partner had a subscription to The Atlantic for a long time. And, you know, there's also always been an interesting group of articles covering a real breadth of news and politics and culture. But lately, it seems to me, Adam, that The Atlantic, with a few other very small or smaller publications, almost seem to be leading the charge for, hey, everybody, our democracy is at risk. And this is what you should know, because I'm not getting that from the New York Times. I'm not getting that from the Washington Post. I'm not getting that from the LA Times. I mean, it feels like your publication is going above and beyond to sound the alarm and to make people aware. Is that your sense too, or am I reading too much into this?
Well, to be honest with you, I can't really speak for The Atlantic. I can only speak for myself. You know, I'm one of many writers of varying ideological tendencies at The Atlantic. I certainly feel as though American democracy is danger. I mean, you see with the president today attempting to decide, you know, what the federal government is going to spend money on in a way that's, you know, blatantly threatens Congress's power of the purse and the separation of powers in a way that if it's allowed to continue, is really the end of Congress's power as an independent institution. And, you know, in terms of birthright citizenship, look, we fought a civil war over whether or not, people who are not white could be citizens of the United States. And at the end of that war, the Union inscribed in the Constitution, a series of amendments that are the cornerstone of multiracial democracy in the United States. And one of them is the 14th Amendment, which guarantees equal protection under the law and guarantees birthright citizenship for everyone who is born here, regardless of where they came from. And an assault on that is really an assault, as I said, on the foundations of multiracial democracy, and it's extremely dangerous. And I think people might not necessarily appreciate how dangerous it is, but the reality is if birthright citizenship is repealed, it's going to impose a significant burden on the rest of us. We're going to have to constantly prove, our identity and our citizenship in many, many contexts in which we're not used to doing that.
I know in your writing you made reference to the Dred Scott decision. We've had really bad Supreme Courts in the past. So is it just something that we have to wait out, or is what's happening now different than what has happened before when we've gotten really awful decisions?
Well, to be honest with you, the Supreme Court has been bad for most of its existence. I think there are very few proud moments in the Supreme Court's history. I mean, people think, one of those is Brown versus Board of Education, but, a lot, the backlash to the ideological backlash to the Warren Court is, essentially why we have this 6-3 majority now. But throughout American history, the Supreme Court has been more likely to narrow American freedom than it has to stand up for it. And that's just the reality of the history of the institution. It has very rarely gone out of its way to protect the rights of Americans. And that responsibility has rested largely on the people themselves who are willing to put people in office who will defend those rights. And who will stand up for the Constitution. It's not something you can ever really rely on the court to do, in part because the court, it is going to follow what it sees as its own interpretation of popular will. I mean, the very same party the Republican Party that passed those Civil War amendments that are the cornerstone of multiracial democracy, they appointed all the justices who then went on to narrow and write those amendments out of the Constitution after Reconstruction during the nadir of race relations in the United States, establishing, decisions like Plessy versus Ferguson that upheld segregation. So the truth is that you can never rely on the court to protect your rights. It's always something that citizens have to take into their own hands with democratic participation in the life of the nation. It's not something you can rely on justices to do.
That's really interesting to hear you say that. Clearly, in my history of the Supreme Court is spotty. I grew up with the Warren Court, and I guess when I was little, and my parents weren't super political, but they were. It was important to both of them to be really well informed, and I guess I grew up with this idea that somehow the Supreme Court saves us and speaks to our better selves and our better angels without actually looking at the totality of the history of the court. Maybe I just was very lucky to become aware of the Supreme Court at a time when it seemed like it was really always there to do the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, look, the Warren Court was a very short window of time in the court's history, and there was a huge ideological backlash to it. People like George Wallace called the court decisions pro-criminal. Nixon said similar things. The conservative legal movement gets its start organizing. The incredibly successful conservative legal movement gets its start organizing against the decisions of the Warren Court. So that brief moment where, American rights are being expanded by the court is one that, historically led to tremendous backlash and led to the situation we're in now, where the justices are trying to roll a lot of those rights back. And I think, the truth is that what you're talking about is not uncommon. The Supreme Court has been coasting on its reputation from decisions like Brown versus Board of Education for a very long time, when in fact it's historically been a reactionary institution that has not been willing to stand up for individual Americans' rights and has more often sided with the powerful in any meaningful dispute.
Wow. Clearly, I need to brush up on my history. So, if the Supreme Court...
I think that period that you're talking about, that historical period with the Warren Court, is so, looms so large in the court's reputation that it just misleads people about the nature of the court. I think your impression is a very common one. And there are occasional decisions that the court makes, like Obergefell, for example, which is now, at risk. Extending marriage equality to same-sex couples. I mean, those decisions stand out, and we remember them, but they're few and far between compared to the others.
Yeah, and I was informed by one of my guests that there are some cases working their way up to the Supreme Court that could provide the Supreme Court with the opportunity to overturn that decision you just referenced that established a right for gay marriage. Do you see that coming too?
I can't decide what the court is going to do. I will say that, some justices like Alito have said that case was wrongly decided. So you have to assume that there are at least a handful of votes on the court for overturning Obergefell. Are there 5 votes? Are there 6 votes? I don't know the answer to that question, and I'm not sure anybody else does for sure. But certainly the conservative movement would like them to overturn it.
Can Congress realistically impose some sort of code of ethics on the Supreme Court? I was talking to one expert about this, and they said, well, the irony is if the Congress tries to impose a code of ethics and it gets challenged in the courts, it could end up before the very Supreme Court it's supposed to rein in. It just seems absurd that they don't adhere to any code of ethics that is really enforceable like other judges do.
Well, I mean, as your guest pointed out, they get the final say on these sorts of things. And I think, probably where the court's authority is strongest is when they're talking about making decisions about what their own rules are. But the truth is that the justices like the perks of being justices, and they are not going to do anything to narrow those perks, and they don't care what you or I think of them because they have lifetime appointments.
Yeah. Somebody suggested, that apparently both Alito and Clarence Thomas alluded to the fact during the run-up to the election that they were thinking about maybe retiring. But, of course, if a Democrat were elected president, they would put their retirement plans on hold. And my thought on that was, is Harlan Crow going to be as generous to Clarence Thomas when Clarence Thomas is no longer in a position of power? Are there going to be, all the different payments and tuition payments and buying a relative's house and the fancy vacations and the private flights and all of that? I mean, what's in it for Harlan Crow if Clarence Thomas retires? He's got to stay on the court, don't you think?
I can't answer that question. I mean, I think the benefit of being a Supreme Court justice, I don't think anybody who's a Supreme Court justice is ever going to go hungry. Let me put it that way. But I can't speak to what Harlan Crow or Clarence Thomas are thinking as far as that kind of thing is concerned.
When it comes in our last couple of minutes here, when it comes to the Supreme Court over the next few months or the next year, what do you think I should be paying attention to? What are you going to be paying attention to?
There are a number of cases coming down the pike. I think one of the important ones people should look at is the case that was recently argued dealing with gender-affirming care with for transgender adolescents in Tennessee. I think the outcome of that case, depending on how narrow or how large the ruling is, could be pretty significant, and not just for trans people, but for laws dealing with any kind of discrimination.
We will definitely keep an eye on that one. Thank you so very much. It has been an interesting conversation, Adam, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Adam Serwer is a staff writer at The Atlantic, and The Atlantic, The Nation, Washington Monthly, ProPublica. There's a new news organization started by Jennifer Rubin and Norm Eisen called The Contrarian. Subscribe to Charlie Sykes. Yes, I know he was a crabby conservative radio host in Wisconsin, but he has an interesting Substack and he speaks truth to power. By the way, speaking of interesting Substacks, our own Jennifer Schulze, who is part of my media segment and who also writes opinion pieces for Heartland Signal, she has a Substack. It's called Indistinct Chatter. Indistinct Chatter. You can Google like Jennifer Schulze's Substack, and she has just posted a new piece on Dr. Phil. We know Dr. Phil, like people from other towns don't necessarily know Dr. Phil because we're all from Chicago. And this is where he became famous and and infamous, if you like. Let me just say that this Indistinct Chatter, the title is Dr. Phil's ICE TV is a clown show designed to bypass journalists, help spread Trump propaganda. Couldn't have said it better myself, Jennifer. So please look up Indistinct Chatter and subscribe, okay? Also, Jim Acosta has done his last show at CNN, and he is also doing a Substack until it is announced where he's going to land. So look for him as well. We are going to take a break. We are going to be back with much more after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
It is Tuesday, and every Tuesday, Rich Eberwein, reporter for Heartland Signal, brings us 3 stories that we might have missed. Rich, how are you doing?
Oh, great day today. Lovely day. How long has this administration been here? It feels like.
I know. Rich, though, I will tell you, as Paul Shivari no doubt already knows, I started this day a little crabby. I was a little cranky. I was a little wound up. And then I realized at one point that I had a stomach ache that was probably of my own creation. And I'm going to have to be a little bit more zen. There isn't enough Pepsid in the world to get me through the next 4 years. So I'm going to have to find my special happy place, Rich.
Deep breaths.
Deep breaths. Deep breaths.
Oh, man.
Hey, just 207 more weeks to go.
Thank you, Mr. Shivari.
Chugging along here.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's start. What have you got for us today?
All right. So, apropos of the news of the day, Heartland Signal clipped a moment of U.S. Representative Rich McCormick, who is a Georgia rep. He was grilled about Trump's federal grant freeze on CNN. He was asked about vulnerable populations being impacted and whether he supports getting rid of free school meals or meal programs, through the Head Start program is one of the examples that they asked him about. And his response included defiance to child labor laws and calling for children to go work at fast food restaurants. And we have a clip of him saying these things.
Comes out of when you talk about school lunches. Hey, I worked my way through high school. I don't know about you, but I worked since I was before I was even 13 years old. I was picking berries in the fields before we had child labor laws that precluded that. I was a paper boy, and when I was in high school, I worked my entire way through. You're telling me that kids who stay at home instead of going to work at Burger King, McDonald's during the summer should stay at home and get their free lunch instead of going to work? I think we need to have a top-down review. Think about where kids need to actually be.
Oh, yeah, those kids, those freeloading kids. What do they think?
It's crazy. I mean, the Head Start program helps families with children as young as 5 years old. We're talking about elementary school children here, and he's saying that they should go work at Burger King and McDonald's. It's quite a statement, given the fact that most of the day today, millions of Americans were, concerned about whether they were going to have access to child care or health care or Medicaid. And this is just a wild response. Quite
and frankly. I will tell you, in college, I worked at Burger King, and you do not get free food. At least the Burger King I worked at, we were allowed to eat whatever we wanted to, and then there was a little chart in the back of the restaurant, and we had to write down our names and what we ate, and the cost for that was taken out of our checks, which I might add were so minuscule as to be ridiculous. So, yeah, if he's saying they should work at McDonald's or Burger King because somehow he thinks that they will be fed at those places, that is not my experience.
Yeah, and I think he's also just chastising the fact that it's a welfare program and that Republicans don't support anything of the such because, it disincentivizes people's values and they need to be working from age 5, apparently. So, yeah, it's pretty tone deaf response, especially given the fact that, that there is so much panic and confusion today because of the administration's efforts. And, it's just a crazy look for the GOP right now.
It is indeed. Or actually, that's kind of redundant, isn't it? Crazy and yeah. I think the crazy is built in. I don't say this just to be flip, because I don't think the Republican Party used to be like this. I mean, I've always disagreed with how they felt we should move the country forward, but it's never been as spineless a party as it is now, in my experience.
I mean, the leader of the party today, basically just through a lot of people who he promised to give relief to, financial relief to, into panic about that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And Meals on Wheels is also going to be affected.
For sure. The Medicaid portals across all 50 states were shut down, and the administration came back and tried to spin it as a coincidental outage of the portals.
Yeah. Timing, just bad timing, huh, Rich?
Despite a massive amount of conflicting reports saying the opposite. So it's, at the very least, I think this just is poor leadership, frankly. I mean, you just threw millions of people into panic over in the name of an ideological crusade to look at the budget and get rid of DEI and transgender support. It's wild.
Yeah. So what else is going on that you want to tell us about?
Yeah, sort of what seems like happened weeks ago. It was only a few days ago. Along the lines of Trump's last controversial move, which was pardoning hundreds of rioters who participated in the January 6th insurrection. Many of them committed violence against Capitol Police officers. In wake of that, there was an interview with the conservative candidate in the Wisconsin State Supreme Court race, and we have a clip of him weighing in on the Trump pardons and how he did not object to them.
President Biden has issued pardons. President Trump has now issued pardons as he's come in, and presidents over history have done that. It's a power they have. I don't object to them utilizing that power.
So in the same interview, he also said that he thinks the people who committed violence should be prosecuted under the law. They were.
Yeah.
And they were many of them were given sentences because they committed said violence. So he didn't have an answer to that. Didn't respond to my request to comment on how that adds up with who Trump pardoned. We were writing about one of the rioters who received a pardon, got a 14-year sentence because he showed up at the Capitol with a weapon and used pepper spray on Capitol officers and, used a folding chair, too, to assault a Capitol police officer. And he also had a prior record with 38 felony charges before he even showed up that day on January 6th, and he is walking free right now. So it's this kind of highlights, even at the local level, Trump is forcing Republicans like Brad Schimmel to defend the release of violent criminals, while his administration is simultaneously overseeing mass deportation in the name of removing violent criminals from the streets.
Yeah, there's some irony for you.
Yeah, indeed. That's Brad Schimmel. This is another very consequential state Supreme Court race coming up in Wisconsin in April, one that we will certainly keep our eye on as we move closer to that date. There's a lot of issues moving in the state Supreme Court up in Wisconsin that, things having to do with reproductive rights and labor.
Reproductive rights, gerrymandering. The Wisconsin Supreme Court is going to have a lot of things to rule on, and how they rule is going to really determine, to a great degree, how the people of Wisconsin live. And I know with Janet Protasewicz, we really talked a lot about this race and the consequences, and now we've had another Democrat retire, and I can't take too much more of this, Rich.
It's a consequential election like every few months now.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, that race, like you were saying, will again determine the ideological majority on the state Supreme Court. So, that could, if it goes back to the conservatives, it could open up another pathway for them to gerrymander the state again, and you'd be kind of back at square one if you're in the state Democratic Party.
Yes, indeed. And I know you've got something to do with Oklahoma on your list today. What's going on there?
Yeah, so we were covering two very different bills moving through the state government in Oklahoma, kind of highlighting some more strange priorities of the local Republican Party in that state. on the one hand, we have State Senator Shane Jett, who is a member of Oklahoma's Freedom Caucus, the state version, and he wrote a bill to deregulate the production of donkey milk. And
oh, my God, I read about this morning.
It changes current law in Oklahoma to, deregulate the production and distribution of donkey milk. And I don't know why, because Senator Jett did not respond to my request to comment on why this is currently a legislative priority for him. But I would think there is a litany of more concerning things on the minds of voters and constituents in Oklahoma.
Yeah,
if I had to go out on a limb,
I don't know that there are a lot of donkey farms out there, and farmers are clamoring to sell their milk. Gosh darn it! It seems pretty bizarre. This is one of those bills where it's like, where did that come from? What constituency does this serve?
I would assume a very niche group of people, but who knows? Anyway, this is kind of bookended by another Freedom Caucus written bill by a state senator named Dusty Devers, who proposed a bill to categorize abortion as homicide.
In Jessica Valenti's newsletter, Abortion Every Day, she's been reporting about this, it all ties into this effort to somehow create fetal personhood, that it's not just a conglomeration of cells. Now, if it's viable, that's a whole nother story. But when it is just basically a bunch of cells replicating, that ain't a person. But if the far right can somehow sell the country on this idea of fetal personhood, then there will be a national ban on abortion, and women who have abortions will be committing murder. So, yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and, there has already been national efforts or national bills written like that, haven't been passed yet, but, Republicans control the House and Senate right now, so it could happen. But at the local level, in states like Oklahoma that are controlled, both chambers and the governor are controlled by Republicans, they routinely impose and propose and implement bills like this, and with little consequence because they have the majorities. And, this one, Oklahoma already restricts abortion, and this would just kind of take it even further. And, anybody who, performs an abortion procedure in the state would be, eligible to be prosecuted for murder.
Yeah, it's a brave new world we've got here, Rich. Thank you for doing this reporting for us and bringing us these stories every week. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, appreciate you having me, Joan. Take it easy.
You too. We are going to take a break, and we're going to be back with Evanston Mayor Daniel Biss right after this.
Now back to Joan Esposito, live, local, and progressive on WCPT 820.
I want you to let you know that David Hochberg has an announcement that he wants us to share, and that is, first of all, that he is doing once again his fundraiser to raise money to buy replacement vests, bulletproof vests for Chicago cops. Those replacement vests wear out. Even whether or not you ever get shot, the vest wears out over time, and those replacement costs are not covered. So David Hochberg is doing a fundraiser for that. And also, he wants you to know that a lot of mortgage professionals are no longer in the business, but his business is actually expanding. So if you're interested in buying a house or refinancing, call 855-563-2843. That's 855-563-2843. And if you want to find out more about the fundraising for the vests, go on your computer, 56david.com. Lower.com, equal housing lender, NMLS 1124061. Joining me now, as promised, is Evanston Mayor Daniel Biss, who is going to have a kind of a party tomorrow night at Double Clutch Brewing Company, 2121 Ashland Avenue, as he is kicking off his re-election campaign. Daniel Biss joins us now. Daniel, how are you?
I am just fine, Joan. How are you?
I'm good. So are you going to be speaking tomorrow night? By the way, it's 5:30 to 7:30. Will there be a presentation?
I will be speaking. We'll have a few other guest speakers as well. And, I'm just going to be talking about what we've accomplished in the last 4 years and what's next for the city of Evanston, should I be fortunate enough to be elected. And obviously, here we are, unfortunately, to say the least, in a second Trump presidency where, there's going to be nothing but backward motion on the federal level, terrible attacks on our rights and our communities. And I think local government is more important than ever in that environment.
I think so, too. Are there any particular federal policies that you're concerned will affect the residents of Evanston particularly? I mean, aside from all of them?
How long do you have? Yeah, right, exactly. I would start with all of them. Look, let's start with today's news, this absurd, cruel, and we believe completely illegal effort to basically cut off all funding to state and local governments while they do a kind of ideological review to see who they're going to attack first. We're talking about basic access to health care, our ability to work on housing, our ability to provide infrastructure that's necessary to get people from point A to point B and keep people safe. This is basic stuff that communities all over the country rely on, and the Trump administration is trying to cut it off because they're bullies who haven't read the law. But it doesn't end there, of course. The absolute fear and panic that is being generated by the Trump administration's cruel policies on immigration is devastating to our community and all communities, and I'm pleased that Evanston is fighting back. Our faith community is standing up. Our residents are united in one voice. And our city passed a strong welcoming ordinance just a few weeks ago to make sure that we are providing every possible protection we can so that ICE is not assisted by the city of Evanston in going after our people. So there is a lot to do, and unfortunately there's a lot of defense to play because of the daily outrages coming out of Washington.
Yeah. With this federal freeze that I believe was supposed to go into effect 50 minutes ago, there's a freeze on funding for things like Head Start and Meals on Wheels. When will you know which programs that, like Meals on Wheels, that exist in Evanston, when will you know whether or not they are on the list and what can you do?
Well, the Trump administration is never great at detail. So it's been a day of confusion and fear, probably on purpose. That's probably what they had in mind. Now, shortly before you and I got on the phone, as I understand it, the judge stayed this order. So hopefully nothing is any longer being implemented, at least until next Monday. You heard the Governor Pritzker, made a very strong, clear statement. Attorney General Raoul is involved, as I understand it, in fighting this. We don't believe any of this is legal, but of course you have to win those cases in court. You can't just, make an assertion and move on. And so I think there will be, by design, based on what the Trump administration is trying to do, there will be confusion for a while.
Confusion and chaos. A lot of people would argue that that's the point, that he wants people in disarray. And, even though I know that a lot of things that he tried to do in his first term were challenged and eventually most of these court cases were won, you know, you never know. You've got to stay on top of everything for fear of what is actually going to get through. And I don't know if you saw the Reuters poll that was released today, but the majority of Americans don't like what he's doing. They don't.
Well, look, let's be clear. You know, I thought it was a tragedy he was elected. I did everything I could to elect Kamala Harris, and I was devastated and anguished on election night. But I think we also understood that, you know, those swing voters who unfortunately went with him, or Democratic leaners who unfortunately stayed home, they were upset about inflation. They, you know, were concerned about the Biden economic record. You know, you can argue with that, but that was not a vote for this. That was not a vote to hold all of the country hostage, to advance a far-right kind of bigoted agenda. That was not a vote to put vaccine deniers in charge of the health system. That was not a vote to put someone close to both Russia and Syria in charge of the secrets as the director of national intelligence. You know, and so I agree that the Trump administration is overstepping their bounds, and they're not giving those kind of few swing voters who they unfortunately won over what they asked for, and that backlash is going to be a very, very important political tool for us to make use of to win back the Congress in 2026 and to put public pressure on him not to do some of these awful things. But we also just have to be honest about the fact that they've got a lot of power and they are going to use it to do really serious damage, and it's just a tragedy.
Yeah. I suspect one of the things that you might be asked about tomorrow night when you have your re-election kickoff party is this weird photo that was posted by 4 Evanston firefighters who are apparently wearing their firefighter T-shirts and jackets, apparently on duty, and they posted of themselves wearing Trump face masks. And I know that already the fire chief has issued an apology. What's going on with that?
Well, that's under investigation. It is not consistent with city rules or the collective bargaining agreement for anybody to engage in any political activity for any side while they're working for the city, as obviously on-duty firefighters in uniform in the firehouse are. And so the investigation is ongoing. As you mentioned, the fire chief made a strong statement. By the way, last night at the city council meeting, the head of our firefighters union, together with dozens of firefighters standing with him, came and clarified. And they said, listen, that picture doesn't represent who we are. And they said something really pivotal, because here's why it's so important. Like, obviously, I hate Trump, and I personally am, displeased to see a picture of folks, celebrating Trump. But the thing that's really critical, we're a government. We work for everybody. We have to work for everybody. We have to work for everybody, irrespective of their political party or how they vote or their race or their immigration status or their gender identity or anything else. Every single person in this town needs to know that if they call the city, they're going to get the help they need and they deserve. It's going to have nothing to do with any of those other factors. And when public servants start to look like they're kind of making political statements, it can put that at risk. And so I was proud of our fire chief and our fire union and our firefighters for standing up and saying strongly and clearly, not we're going to make excuses, not we're going to pretend it's no big deal, but instead we're going to say, listen, we are about serving everybody, and we are here to let you know that every single person in this fire department takes protecting people in Evanston as their key responsibility. So, look, the picture did damage. There's no question. It caused pain and alarm, and there's cleaning up to do, but we take that seriously, and we're taking the investigation seriously.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. And I'm glad to hear that the union and the firefighters and the fire chief all acknowledge that for somebody who was on duty, that was utterly inappropriate. I want to remind you guys again, tomorrow night, Wednesday, 5:30 to 7:30 at Double Clutch Brewing Company, 2121 Ashland Avenue, is going to be a celebration of the effort to get Daniel Biss reelected as mayor of Evanston. Daniel, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's always a joy to talk with you, Joan. I appreciate the opportunity, and thanks for everything you do.
Thank you. That's going to do it for me today. By the way, I want you to know that Patty Vasquez is going to talk to one of the people we most admire in the country. Capitol Police Officer Harry Dunn is going to join Patty in just a few minutes. Wow, that's going to be great. Have a great evening. By the way, Spencer Critchley is going to join us. So remember, you have to go on his website and read the next chapter in his new book. So we're going to have the WCPT book club from 4 to 5. I will see you tomorrow afternoon. Have a great evening. Good night.